What our brains haven't quite figured out yet, though, is that Twitter is not actually our tribe. Is that Facebook is not actually keeping us safe from predators. Instagram is not where we find family.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Together, we can make a better future.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, I'm discussing polarization and the idea of moral narcissism. My guest has published an article in a substack newsletter discussing this idea that people today are taking on absolute moral stances in polarizing issues because of the status it gives them in their tribe, irrespective of the cost to society. In my guest's blog, she makes an analogy of a group who believes eating blue cheese is immoral, so they outlaw it. As a result of their banning blue cheese, people start dying from eating unregulated blue cheese. But the group does not change their moral stance in regards to this. They feel uplifted by their moral stance rather than the effect it has on lives. They don't reevaluate the practical outcome of their moral stance. There's another group, of course, who believe the group outlawing the blue cheese is evil. They ostracize members of the blue cheese outlawers group from society, resulting in some members of the group being radicalized and resorting to violence, again, costing lives. Both groups are holding their moral purity above the lives of people, and she calls this behavior moral narcissism. If you're interested in what you're hearing, I urge you to press like on your podcast app and feel free to share it with your friends. Come visit me on my Facebook group, The Rational View, or come support me at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. After years of serving as a high school government and law teacher, Sharon McMahon took her passion for education to Instagram, where more than 1 million people who affectionately call themselves Gov-nerds rely on her for nonpartisan, fact-based information as America's government teacher. Sharon is also the host of the award-winning podcast, Here's Where It Gets Interesting, where each week she provides entertaining yet factual accounts of America's most fascinating moments and people. In all that she does, Sharon encourages others to be world-changing humans. She has led her community in various philanthropic initiatives that have raised more than $9 million for teachers, domestic violence survivors, terminally ill children, medical debt forgiveness programs, refugees, and more. In addition, she is the author of The Preamble, a substack newsletter about politics and history. Sharon, welcome to The Rational View.
So happy to join you. Thanks for inviting me.
So could you tell us a little bit about your interesting background? You started out as a high school teacher. What prompted you to take your message to the internet and get on Instagram?
Well, the 2020 election, it was a challenging time in U.S. history. It doesn't matter who you were supporting politically. Everyone agrees, let's not do that again. That was not a fun time. Let's not repeat. And I started noticing things on the internet that were just not adding up. Right? There were just a lot of pieces of very, very weird misinformation that was floating around.
Yeah.
Things that were just demonstrably false, not matters of opinion. So things like the Electoral College is a school you can graduate from. Things like that.
Goodness.
You know what I mean? No, Chad, it sure isn't. Things that you could just resolve with a quick Google, but yet were being said with conviction and authority. And it turns out when you say something in the right tone of voice, people tend to believe you. So that was really the impetus. I had developed all of this knowledge and communication skills from teaching students who basically don't want to be in this required government class,
Sure.
explaining things that, in a way that helps people be able to understand them. And I decided to just start making some nonpartisan, fact-based explainer videos. Like, here's how it actually works. And instead of using the real candidate names, which are triggering for people, by
Hmm.
the way,
Hmm.
if you say the word Trump incorrectly or Biden incorrectly, people find that very triggering.
Oh my.
So without even using real candidate names, so nobody could say, "Oh, she's trying to get you to vote for them." I These videos ended up becoming popular, and I started getting media requests to come on different TV shows and radio programs to explain how the system worked without taking a position on who should win. And
Hmm.
it turns out that finding somebody who can explain things in a way that makes sense to your average listener, without telling you what to think, turns out there are not a lot of people doing that.
It's a rare
And it
ability.
became very popular.
Yeah, after doing a little bit of research into your background, I feel like we have a shared rational viewpoint.
Mm,
Your bio mentions obviously that you people rely on you for this nonpartisan fact-based information, which is what I'm trying to purvey on my podcast as well. I find it's very difficult though in today's polarized media environment to not respond to some very triggering stuff or to not
mhm,
editorialize and become pegged as partisan. And I've gotten attacks from both sides
mhm,
on various issues, especially when I find I have strong opinions on certain issues that I find important, that seem to be backed up by evidence, then sure, maybe there's bias involved. How do you remain nonpartisan and
mm,
maintain that position?
mm. Yeah, that is that can be very challenging. And actually, one of the big challenges is staying out of the fray. Right? It's actually far easier to give into temptation and be like, actually, you're dumb. Oh,
Hmm.
good one, Chad. Oh, what a sick burn. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
to not devolve into like the snarkiness and the pettiness.
Yeah,
When somebody is personally attacking you, that actually requires a lot of discipline to
it's
not
it
to not
does.
fight back to not fight back against them,
Hmm.
because your knee jerk reaction is to be like, oh sure, so funny, so hilarious, wow, you're really really smart, you got me.
You're really dumb.
um,
Here's the answer.
Right, right. Oh, let me Google that for you. So it requires discipline to not devolve into that. And one of the
Hmm.
reasons I choose not to do it very often, is because I don't think that that's the better angels of our nature, right? I think
Hmm.
we're better off when we have measured, important conversations rather than just kicking each other's shins and making fun of it. Is your mom overweight? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
The internet makes it too easy to hate on other people.
It's very easy to be remote and to flame people. I, I
Yes, yes.
I saw your introductory post on the preamble on the presidential debate, which was last night between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And I loved your first bit of advice on keeping an open mind. You
Mm,
said, quote, smart people change their minds when presented with new and better information. And if you love being right, the fastest way to do that is to stop being wrong faster. I,
mhm,
I think, unfortunately, many people in our society right now are not so much interested in being right as fitting in with their tribe.
mhm.
And it's
I think
difficult to have an open mind and stand up for things that seem to not make sense when you actually gain status in your tribe by sharing these divisive memes that talk down to the other guys.
Mhm.
So
Totally.
I'm wondering what your impression of how do you get people to break out of that silo of polarization?
Mm, mm. Yeah, I totally agree with you that tribalism is one of our strongest instincts. Tribalism is how we have remained safe, physically safe throughout human, civilization. A human alone was vulnerable. a human alone was food for the wolves. Belonging to your tribe is how you gained safety. And so our brains are heavily involved to find safety in numbers. They're heavily evolved to be like, stick with the people that accept you, because if you go it alone, then bad things might happen. That is just part of our wiring. So it's understandable how humans got to be in this position. What our brains haven't quite figured out yet, though, is that Twitter is not actually our tribe. Is that Facebook is not actually keeping us safe from predators. In fact, probably the opposite.
That's a good point.
Instagram is not where we find family. Our brains feel like all of these social interactions are similar or equivalent, that it's the same. Being like, yeah, that's right, you get them. But that's the same as engaging in a group effort to defeat a hungry wolf. That those are the same things in our minds. Fortunately, we have, our brains do have the ability to override our hardwired circuitry and to say, actually, agreeing with you on Twitter is not the same as helping my mom fend off a wolf from eating my baby brother. That these are not the same equivalent ideas. But I do think that's sort of where it comes from. Is this, I agree with you that being part of a tribe feels safe. And anything that might jeopardize our status in that group is something that people have difficulty getting rid of. Saying, I've changed my mind about this topic because I have been presented with new and better information. You see this in politics all the time. Anyone who's changed their mind on a topic, they're accused of being a flip-flopper. They're like, oh, explain why your views have changed. Excuse me, isn't it actually good to change your views? It's bad to keep the same bad views. That's worse than saying, I have a new way of thinking about this because I have been, I've talked to more people. I've heard more experiences. I've learned more about the downstream effects of X, Y, and Z thing. I have a fuller picture of an issue. So I have changed my mind. That actually requires more courage than to just like stick with your one position of like, I've always said that, the moon is made of green cheese and I'm going to keep on saying it.
Once you've ridiculed people online for holding this viewpoint, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of moral fortitude and humility to admit you were wrong. Once you're out there on the internet, I find that a lot of the time you're trying to argue for the silent majority who are not posting. I mean, the people that are posting these memes are typically the short end of the distribution, I would say. There's a mass of people out there that don't post and that just listen to these things and can be swayed. But I think there's a lot of people that are involved in the discussions online that are just bought in, and they have too much social currency out defending their position to change. They set up a tribe, and they set up a whole persona, basically defending a point rather than listening and discussing. So you need to break away from that mindset.
Right. They know that it's just a matter of time before somebody takes a screenshot of their old tweets and says, "This you?" Like to throw back up in their face when they said that, well, I used to think the moon was made of green cheese and now I know it's made of rocks. That they're going to get mocked for changing their position, or they're going to get mocked by a different tribe for having that bad position to begin with. Humans are not especially online humans, chronically online humans are not especially good at accepting somebody whose mind has been changed, unless that person is really, really willing to sort of scrape and bow about it, where they're like, oh my gosh, I was so wrong. You guys have been right this whole time. I can't believe I used to think this horrible thing. Can you please forgive me? Unless you are really willing to humble yourself in a major way, humans online are not very forgiving of people who change their mind.
So true. So I found you online. I was searching through, had these ideas in my mind about tribalism and generating outrage. And you had an article on your Substack called The Preamble about
Mhm.
moral narcissism,
Mhm.
which I thought was very interesting. And I'd never heard that term before. Could
Mm.
you just tell us what you mean by the term moral narcissism?
Mm. Yeah. So, I mean, if we think about somebody who's narcissistic, they, of course, believe that the world revolves around them, right? That they're right,
Hmm.
that people should agree with them because their opinions are correct. That's just what a narcissist is. They're full of
Yeah.
themselves. That's the easiest way to describe it. Well, I think that very often our online discourse has created a situation in which um, we must surround ourselves only with people who agree with us. We must surround ourselves only with people who hold the same views because there's a guilt by association. If I'm friends with
Mm.
Al and Al thinks the moon's made of green cheese, well, that rubs off on me in some way. Right? Like
Mm.
it reflects poorly on me. That's, I think, often how people online view things. How can you be following him? Right? Have you ever scrolled somebody's follower list and been like, "How are you following that person? What?" So there's this idea that you should only surround yourself with the people who have the same views as you. And the question about why that is true is um, because you have the correct views, right?
Of
You
course.
are so narcissistic that not you personally, but I think this is just common that our views are the correct views. And so we should only surround ourselves with people who have the same correct views.
Hmm.
And so it's actually a very narcissistic way of looking at the world that my views are correct. Everyone else's views are incorrect. If you're incorrect, get out. And
Mm.
we have come to equate our moral beliefs, some of which might be great, and some of which are going to, in 20 years' time, going to be like, why would I have believed that thing? Some of our
Mm.
moral beliefs um, uh, can be incredibly narcissistic, that I only have room in my tent for people who agree with me.
Right.
Here's
Right.
the other sort of interesting aspect of this concept of moral narcissism, which is that often our desire to surround ourselves only with people that agree with us cause us to violate our own moral values. So let's say we believe that you should love your neighbor or care for your neighbor.
Hmm.
We should not have, uh, you know, homeless children living outside your house. If you can feed them and help them, you should. That we should care about people in our communities.
Right.
Well, let's say that's a belief. It's a very common belief system, whether it comes from religion, whether it comes from some other moral construct. Lots of people have a belief that is similar to that. We should care about our neighbors because that's what's
Hmm.
good for us. It's good for us as people. It's good for us as a society.
Yes.
But when we only surround ourselves with people who agree with us, we are in fact violating our own moral beliefs because we are actually not caring about our neighbors when we cast them out of our lives and say, because you do not hold the same beliefs as me, we cannot be friends. I
Mm.
cannot follow you on Instagram. You can't come to the barbecue. That actually violates your stated moral position of caring about your
Mm.
neighbors. In fact, what you're saying then is I only care about my neighbors that I feel are deserving of my care. And the people who care that deserve my care are the people who agree with me.
Mm.
So, I watched this video not long ago. This woman who moved into a newish neighborhood, um, or I'm sorry, she had a neighbor that moved into her
Okay.
neighborhood, and the neighbor had a new baby. And she knew that the neighbor had a new baby because they had a big stork sign in their yard saying, it's a girl. And so, in a friendly gesture, this woman goes over to the new neighbor's house and brings them a bunch of her old baby girl stuff, and is like, "Here's a bunch of clothes and toys and a stroller. Do you need all this for your baby girl?" And the neighbors are so grateful and so nice, and they send over a bottle of wine and a really nice thank you card. And they realize they each have two kids that are similar in ages. And the woman making the video is like, "I finally felt like we were going to have like couple friends, like family friends, where all of us together can go to the park, have
Hmm.
the kids over for a barbecue." She was really excited about this.
Okay.
And then a couple of weeks later, she notices that the neighbors have put up a political flag in their yard for a
Oh,
candidate they do not agree with.
okay.
And what the result was that the woman who had initially made the gesture, given the baby clothes and the stroller, now regarded that other family as repugnant. Now she
Repugnant.
says, I cross the street when I see them in their yard. And they
Mm,
had no altercation with each other. There was not a scenario in which they got into a fight. This was all caused by the other family having a political flag that they disagreed with. Now,
yeah.
that actually very likely violates that person's moral beliefs to care for your neighbors. In this
Hmm.
case, it's like your literal neighbor, not even a metaphorical neighbor, your actual physical neighbor. Makes you want to cross the street when you see them in their yard. That's moral narcissism. My beliefs are so correct that I must excise any interaction with other people that violates my personal beliefs.
Yeah. There's also an energy aspect to this because, being surrounded by people that are always validating your beliefs is easy and relaxing and a
Mhm.
dopamine hit
Mhm.
each time you get it.
Mhm.
Whereas being challenging your beliefs and going out and listening to what other people on the other tribe are saying and trying to understand their position is hard and it takes energy
Mhm.
and it's draining. So not everybody has that sort of energy to spend, especially these days. I find it's very difficult. People are working hard to get by, and a lot of people just don't have the energy to take on that sort of a role. So and those type of people, you kind of say, well, just don't pass on memes. Don't make the problem worse, please.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
uh,
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. Like, so many people are just trying to subsist. I'm just trying to keep
mhm,
my nose above the waterline here. I don't have time to go knock on everybody's door and be like, tell me why you're voting for Bob so I can listen to understand. Like, I'm just trying to feed my kids. Okay. Like I
mhm,
really do get
mhm.
it. I very much do. But I think you're right that at the very minimum, you can choose not to engage in a system that actively uh, actively tries to cut out people with whom you have differences. You can
Mhm.
just choose not to engage in that. You don't have to, nobody's saying dedicate your whole life to going on podcasts and trying to understand other people's political views. I understand that's too much for most people. But how about just don't make the problem worse? Let's
Yeah.
start there. Don't make it worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the reasons I have the podcast. We want to get beyond the polarizing debate and get to a rational debate where we can discuss the facts. We can just we need to have a shared basis of facts. We need to have a
Hmm.
shared reality, and we're
Hmm.
the more the media is basically almost gone two opposite directions on what reality is in a lot of
Hmm.
cases, and
Hmm.
so that's where evidence-based reporting, like what you do, is very important, I think. And it's like a fact checking
Mm.
for the history of government and that sort of thing. So
Hmm.
so good on you to doing that.
Thank you.
uh, so you have recently published a book
Hmm.
titled "The Small and the Mighty," and I've was able to receive an advanced copy, and I've read a couple of the stories in it. You have a very engaging writing style. It really brings the characters to life. So
Thank
great
you.
job.
Thank you.
So you have several historical vignettes about unsung heroes
Hmm.
throughout the book. The amount of work that you must have been involved in researching all of these stories seems like it must have been quite a challenge. How did you
Hmm.
find out about these particular people, or how did you choose these ones
Mm.
and dig through all of the background that was necessary?
Yeah, it's taken me 3 years to publish this book, so it is a tremendous amount of work. The subtitle of the book is 12 Unsung Americans Who Changed the Course of History. And I think when people read the book, they'll see what an incredible impact an individual can have without being rich and famous. right? These are not the
Mm.
people who have the big monuments in Washington, D.C. and the marble statues. But yet when you read about what they've done, it has this sense of like, dang, why aren't they in the books? Like they deserve to be noted. So choosing them was part of the challenge, right? Like finding them and figuring out, is there enough documentation about their story that it can create a compelling narrative for the reader? Because that's always one of the challenges with writing history, is especially when you're writing a book that is meant to sell at a bookstore, not a textbook. You have to write something that people want to read, and not just a boring list of facts. So finding characters to profile, finding stories to tell is part of the talent of a history writer. A good history writer is knowing what people will find compelling, and knowing where to look to uncover their stories. So there are people that I really wish that I could have included, but they just didn't. There's not enough documentation on their stories. Frankly, that is nearly every person of color in United States history for the first couple hundred years of our history, where people of color, women, were systematically excluded from the historic narrative. Their stories were not recorded. Many times, people were never taught to read. Their family histories were erased. And so they never had the opportunity to even pass down their stories orally. So there are so many people who fit that criteria, yet who did really incredible things that I wish that I could have included in this book. So one of the challenges is finding somebody whose story has some documentation, even if I have to go through and weave all of these disparate pieces together, which is what I did. There still needs to be some threads to work with. I can't invent something out of nothing. So that's one of the challenges, is finding people who have recorded stories to tell.
Mm. It's interesting you say how these people, small people can change the future. I don't mean small people like very small people. I mean people with
Hmm,
not large
hmm, hmm.
statures can change the future. And one of the interesting analogies I was told, people, when thinking about science fiction, for example, time travel. When you look at the possibility of time travel, people are so worried that any little thing they might do will change the future.
Hmm,
And it's just the opposite of people who feel stuck that they can't change the future in the current
hmm,
situation. It's the dichotomy there was surprising to me.
hmm, hmm.
And so the
Yeah.
stories are really good. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed
Thank
the
you.
learning about some of this stuff. Like, it's just inspiring to hear what some of these people did. Which of the stories do you feel is like the most amazing and the most eye
Mm.
catching?
Mm. I love them all for a variety of reasons. Whether you are into military history, or whether you're into women's history, or whether you're into educational history, or the history of businesses, or the history of people who were formerly enslaved or faced incredible discrimination in the United States. There's a
Mhm.
variety of different people who are profiled, who have incredible stories to tell. And one of my favorite stories in the book belongs to a woman named Septima Clark.
Okay.
Septima is somebody who is sort of the grandmother of the civil rights movement. She teaches Rosa Parks. Before Rosa Parks becomes Rosa Parks, she is one of the people who
Hmm.
helps equip Rosa Parks to become the civil rights leader that she is, because Rosa Parks did not refuse to give up her seat on that bus in December 1955 by accident. She didn't
Hmm.
just decide one day, you know what, I'm too tired, I'm not getting up. She had been preparing for that moment for a long time. And
Oh,
she'd been
okay.
working as a civil rights worker for a very long time. So Septima
Hmm.
Clark is one of the reasons that Rosa Parks is able to become who she is. And Septima has a very challenging life story. She has a set of life circumstances that nobody would want to trade places with. She has a child who dies. Her spouse, she discovers that her spouse has an entirely secret second life, in which she has a different wife and different children. And then her spouse dies, leaving her to be a single mother, and she contemplates suicide. And multiple times she almost dies in accidents, and she's fired from her job, and she's falsely arrested. And like the list of life circumstances you would not look at it and be like, I'd take her life instead of mine. Like you would never think
Sure.
that.
Wow.
And yet one of the things that she says when she gets to the end of her life, somebody asks her one of the things that she's learned. And she says, I have learned that I can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. And I just loved that sentiment that it speaks against this idea of moral narcissism, that your enemies could have a change of heart at any moment. And how would you ever know if you refuse to work with them? How would they ever have a change of heart if they're never around anybody who thinks differently? If you cut them out of your life, how will your enemy ever learn something different? And this is a woman who had substantial enemies. Again, they're trying to like falsely arrest her, fire her, kill her, accuse her
Yikes.
of fake things, light things on fire. This was not a woman who had an enemy of a dude I don't like in the comments on Facebook. That's not who we're talking about here. Like she had real life enemies, people who actively opposed everything she was trying to do. And yet she learned that I can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any minute. And how many of us are giving up the opportunity to change the world for the better simply by cutting out people with whom we disagree? How will they ever have a change of heart at any minute if we're not around to influence them for the good?
Wow. Yeah, no, that's a very powerful message, and from a difficult position for sure. As you say, countering troll message on Facebook is a different level than that.
Right.
So some of these people really came from challenging situations, and slavery, and having basically no rights, having your family sold on an auction block. I mean, this is just stuff that you couldn't. It's very hard to even envision that level of experience these days.
Yes, totally.
I know I have dabbled a little bit in genealogical research on my own, and I'm from Southern Ontario, from just south of Detroit, in that area, and many of my ancestors were actually settlers in the U.S. frontier around the time of the War of Independence, actually, and several lineages that had been settlers there were captured by Indians and then sold to the British at Fort Detroit and became farmers in Canada. So it's a very interesting story that I just was completely unaware of until I started looking into the history. And I've got a Hessian soldier, and really cool stuff. Like, I love the history. I mean, I'm not very good at it, but I really love it.
Yeah. I think this idea that, when you really start to learn about it, history will come alive for you. And these people will not just seem like black and white pictures. The more you learn, the more real they become. And it allows you to imagine yourself in a scenario of like, what would I have done in that scenario? Where would I have gone? What would I have done if I had been captured and sold at a military fort on the Great Lakes?
Yeah.
It just gives you a very different perspective on the world, that yours is not the only one that's ever existed.
So yeah, that's great. I'm very impressed with your book, and I recommend it to anyone who's interested in history of unsung heroes.
Thank you.
Very good. I was also I would say really impressed by one of your blog posts. I was looking through creeping through all of your blog posts on gun violence in the United States, and the title was "Guns Are the Golden Calf." I see what you did there. You really have a gift for tailoring the message to the audience that you're trying to get to. And I'm sure some people who aren't up on their biblical stories wouldn't understand the reference, but what is the golden calf in reference to?
Yeah, it's a story of the ancient Israelites who are wandering in the desert. And they decide that instead of worshiping the God that they've been told is the one true God, that they will make for themselves a golden calf and they will worship it instead. And eventually they're discovered, and they're found out for worshiping a false god. And whether or not the article is not at all asking you to believe in the story of the ancient Israelites or anything of that nature, but it is a very well known story in both Christianity and Judaism. Moses is a figure in Islam, and again in Christianity, in Judaism. This is a story that's very well known in world history. Um,
Mhm.
but one of the reasons I included it is because I believe that some people have made guns a false idol,
Mm.
and that access to unlimited military grade or nearly weaponry is more important to them than protecting the lives of children and in their classrooms. And
Mhm.
this is not to say that people can't own guns. I grew up in a family where my dad was in the military. My dad owned guns,
Mhm.
but my dad did not worship his weapons. There's a
Yes.
difference between I own this to deer hunt. I grew up in Minnesota, right? I currently live on a dirt road in rural Minnesota. My next door neighbor has a shooting range at his house and loves to do target practice. So I am not coming from the position of like only dumb people own guns. Guns are all take all the guns away. It's all terrible. That's not my position.
Mhm.
I understand that the cat is out of the bag. The Pandora's box has been opened, especially in the United States where we have more guns than people. I understand that there is no going door to door and being like, give me all your weapons. That's never going to happen. And yet, I don't know that there's much of a rational argument to be made that a person who turns 18 one day should be able to go in and buy AR 15s. Basically, unlimited rounds of weapons, walk
Mhm.
into an elementary school and shoot 22 people. I don't
Yeah.
know that there's a rational argument to be made that that is a wise public policy.
Mhm.
If you look at the restrictions we have on things like food safety, of like, if you want to make deli meat, first you have to keep the ham at this temperature and you have to process it on the equipment that is cleaned in such a way. And then it has
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
stored at a certain refrigerated temperature so that it doesn't develop listeria, because listeria can make you sick. Listeria can cause birth defects in unborn children. Old people can die from listeriosis. Like the restrictions that we have on food safety in the United States are about 10 times more than the restrictions we have on gun safety.
Mhm. Or
And
driving, you have to have a license to drive. You have to go
right,
through tests. You have
you
to
have to have
study. You
you
have
have
to
to have
have,
insurance.
you can't use your car while you're drunk.
Right, right. That's not to say you can't have a car or we should take all the cars away. It's just saying that it is normal to make sure that somebody who is operating a deadly weapon, like a car, which can be a deadly weapon, um, has a basic understanding of how to operate it safely, knows what the rules of the road are. And
Mhm.
there are very clear consequences for somebody who violates the rules of the road. So, yes, we'll take away your ability to drive if you're driving drunk. So there's it just it makes no sense rationally to me
Indeed.
that the United States would rather um, worship at the feet of weaponry than protect the lives of children.
Mm.
And I just don't think there's a strong argument to be made that children's lives are not worth it.
Yeah, there seems to be an element of society that feels that all regulations or all government regulations are bad, and
Hmm.
that the government shouldn't have any role in regulating things.
Hmm.
Um, but evidentially speaking, I think unregulated one of the reasons we've brought governments in place is that unregulated, barons of commerce have typically destroyed vast swaths of people's savings, have had very bad effects on the environment. Until we brought in the Environmental Protection Act, rivers caught fire, there was
Right.
garbage along the highways. These things actually do make a difference for the good. And I think, if you look at the evidence, people should agree that things are qualitatively better, qualitatively and quantitatively better, with reasonable regulations. And the argument shouldn't be whether or not we have regulations. It should be on where is the reasonable line. And, this
That's
is
right.
where we need a healthy debate between both sides, and throwing, firebomb memes at each other is not going to progress the,
Right.
the discussion.
Right. And I think some people have this idea of like, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And
I've
I
heard
understand why they say that. And yet, a gun is a tool that makes it incredibly efficient to kill a large number of people from far away and to kill them all quickly in a classroom. It is much harder to do a drive-by stabbing. Right? That's much a drive-by bow and arrow shooting. That's a much more challenging thing to do because guns are a tool that make it easy to quickly and efficiently kill large numbers of people. And I'm talking specifically about semi-automatic weapons, things like AR-15s. I'm not talking about your hunting rifle, the deer hunt, which are not, that's generally not what is being used in mass shootings. And I'm also not talking about your guns for your personal protection of like, I have one in a little safe by my bed in case somebody walks in, breaks into my house. I'm talking specifically about these very high powered weapons that are used to carry out mass shootings and are used to harm children in schools and teachers, staff members in schools, and in other places like grocery stores and concert venues and things of that nature. The United States has had hundreds, over 300 mass shootings in the year 2024 so far. And yet we are some people wholesale unwilling to even talk about what we can do to help mitigate that problem. Some people say, well, because guns don't kill people, people kill people. Having new gun restrictions won't stop people from killing people. And to that, I would say, there is no perfect way to eliminate all crime. Even prisons have crime, right? Even prisons have crime. We can't live in a police state where we eliminate all crime. That's not the goal. So the goal cannot be perfect enforcement of every single law, but anything that makes it a little bit more difficult to mow children down in the hallway outside algebra class. Why wouldn't we want to put a little extra obstacle in somebody's way that makes them think twice, that makes it so they're not acting on an impulse? Especially the impulses of young men who are primarily the perpetrators of mass shootings. Why wouldn't we want to make it a little bit harder for that person to access the kinds of weapons that can kill 12, 14, 20 of their classmates in a very short period of time? The idea that we should do nothing because we can't ensure perfect enforcement, that's not the criteria for any law.
Yeah.
That's not the criteria for any other law. Guess what? It is illegal to commit acts of rape. It's illegal. But we don't say, well, you know how guys are. You can't stop them. So what's the point of making it illegal? We don't say that. No, it's illegal. You should go to prison if you do that. It doesn't mean that we perfectly enforce that law, but yet enacting additional restrictions on your ability to obtain high-powered weapons. The only reason we're not creating reasonable safety measures. And by reasonable, I'm saying things like universal background checks, red flag laws, safe storage laws, things that the overwhelming majority, over 80% of Americans believe in. These are not fringe ideas, right? If 80% of Americans say
gun owners believe in safe handling of guns and safe storage of them.
Correct. Exactly. We should be keeping there should be a law that requires you as an adult law-abiding gun owner from storing your weapon in a way that a child can access it. Why isn't that a reasonable thing to ask for? In the same way that you don't allow your children to operate your motor vehicle. You make sure that
Seems
they are
fair.
safe. You don't leave your keys laying around where the kids can just take it and do whatever you want. It's your job to keep your child from accessing your motor vehicle. It's your job to keep your child from accessing your guns. And too often, like some of the more recent gun school shootings, I'm thinking about about Ethan Crumbley, and also the most recent school shooting his name is Colt Gray in Georgia. Both of them obtained their weapons from their parents. Both of them were, 14, 15 years old, and they got their guns from their parents. And in both cases, actually, both Colt and Ethan, their parents knew about their son's mental health challenges and continued to leave their weapons either unsecured or to physically give weapons to their 15-year-old. That's what happened with Ethan Crumbley. They bought it for him illegally.
Wow.
So, and fortunately, Ethan's parents have both been convicted of a crime and are in prison. And it looks like Colt's dad is going to be convicted of a crime and put in prison. But why shouldn't it be the law that adults have to store their dangerous weapons in a safe manner? That's not an unreasonable ask.
Yeah, the easy access to guns is definitely the problem. And I think if you were to look at the statistics of gun deaths, I mean, bringing a gun to the house is much more likely to be used to kill yourself or a loved one than it is to protect you from a house invasion or something like that. And the climate of fear that drives people to buy guns for protection, I think, is one thing that differentiates Canada from the US, at least. I did a series of podcasts on gun control and talked to people in this, and I did some research on the numbers. And we have roughly similar numbers of hunting rifles per person in Canada and the US. In fact, even probably more in Canada than the US. But the real difference is in the handguns for personal defense. Canadians just don't have them. Whereas the US, just about everyone has one or two or three. And it's, if you look at the statistics, it's children finding these and killing their parents or killing each other, or in a moment of depression, you having a gun at your hand, doing
That's
something
right.
irrevocable.
That's right.
Or someone else in your family. So, just bringing those statistics to light should help people realize what we need to do to prevent or minimize. You're never going to prevent, as you say, but to minimize the impact of this on society. It seems a no-brainer to bring in some reasonable regulations.
Right. Which child's life is not worth saving? Right? Which child's life would you point to and say, my gun is more important than you? If you can point to a single child and say, my access to my AR-15 is worth more than your life, then we have found the problem, right? And the problem is your
That's
worship
powerful.
of weapons. I'm a realist. I understand that there's no going back, that we're not collecting all the guns, that we're not going to a gun-free society. Like I'm a realist. And so I understand. I understand the reality that we're faced with, but I also think that the change has to come from people being willing to say, my preference to mess around with this AR-15 for fun at my shooting range at my house in the country, my preference to be able to engage in that activity I think is fun, is not worth it. It's like people who love to street race. I love to drive 150 miles an hour down the road. Your desire to engage in that fun activity is not worth it. It's not worth the threat to public safety. It's not worth the threat to your own life.
Isn't that in the Constitution?
You have the right to drive anywhere you want, everywhere you want, and own all the guns.
So we're getting towards the end of our time slot here. So what's next for for Sharon McMahon? What are you
Hmm.
working on now? Where are you going with your work?
Yeah, well, I'm leaving in a couple of weeks to go on a big nationwide book tour. So I will be at 14 cities around the country talking about the small and the mighty, and appearing at theaters around the country. I have, a lot of exciting speaking engagements coming up, and I'm excited to continue to share my writing on the preamble. It's been very, very encouraging to see how many people have subscribed. We already have, it's only been around since June, and we already have over 200,000 subscribers.
Wow.
And so I'm really excited about the future of the preamble, and all of the ways that we can continue to grow it and reach new people.
Oh, great job.
Thank you.
I urge anyone else to go take a look at it. It's really well written, and some very contentious topics, well discussed. And
Thank you.
Sharon, for spending your time with me today, I'd be happy to send you a Rational View t-shirt that you
Oh,
can
thank
take on
you.
your book tour with you.
I would love one.
I
Yes.
might be a little bit late for that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.